All right, welcome everybody. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so before we officially get started with the webinar. But we have all the people in place, so that's a good start. So we'll just wait 30 seconds so we get everybody in. As I can see the attendees coming in now, and then we'll get started. All right, I press record, so we are currently recording. So again, I want to welcome our panelists today. We have our Executive Director, Mary Jane Bender, as well as Alexa Vicroy from US Soccer, who's with Member Relations. And our guest speaker today is Dr. Jessica Bartley, who is recently now the Director of Mental Health Services with the USOPC. So we're really, really excited to have everybody here today. Looking forward to questions that you guys may have. So feel free to throw any questions into the Q&A, into the chat. And I know there is going to be a survey at the end as well. So I'll throw it over to you, Dr. Jessica Bartley, and appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
All right. So thank you all so much for having me. As it was introduced, I am Dr. Jessica Bartley. I am the Director of Mental Health Services at the USOPC. I've been there for about 1 year. It's a really new program to have mental health at the USOPC. A little bit about my background and interest in presenting to the soccer community. So I grew up in Dallas, Texas, played for a number of competitive organizations there. And also played at the University of Texas a very long time ago, so more than 20 years ago. But very near and dear to my heart to be presenting to this group. Also, my husband grew up in the Chicagoland area and played soccer there, also played in college. So we are a soccer family. So I am excited to be presenting to you all about mental health. We have been working on this presentation quite a bit. So just wanted to share a little bit about mental health and what we've been doing at the USOPC and with US Soccer. So I am going to share my screen. All right, so with a little bit about this, there is a tremendous.
Sorry, it's sorry to interrupt. It's the presentation. Your presentation slide is showing not the actual presentation itself. So what you see on your side.
Gotcha. Let me do. Thanks for telling me.
Yes, slideshow. Sorry.
Perfect. Can y'all see that now? Is it the whole slide?
It is. Try sharing again.
Yeah, try sharing again.
All right.
And then presentation mode. Yeah.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Better? Okay.
Yeah, great. Thanks
Thanks for telling me right away. That would have been amazing to just keep going. Okay, so we just wanted to talk a little bit about mental health with Illinois Youth Soccer. So again, this is some presentations that we've been really working on over the past year and just really narrowing down what would be the most helpful to present for youth soccer in general. So some concepts that have been really important that we've been discussing over the past year: mental health versus mental illness. And I think it's just really important to know that mental health and mental illness are different. And so during the pandemic, there is this concept that's become really popular between flourishing and languishing. So I'd like to highlight the fact that everyone actually has mental health. So we all have mental health. And the theory is that we all kind of slide along this spectrum between flourishing and languishing. And then not everyone has mental illness. So we can go anywhere from a serious mental illness to no mental illness at all. And that actually does not mean we're not struggling with our mental health. So you may not be sleeping well, you may not be eating well, you may not be performing well. And so it's important to really understand what box you might be in. And then in order to really destigmatize mental health, and mental illness, there are plenty of people in this world who have serious mental illness and actually have incredible mental health and are really flourishing and living incredible lives. So that's what we really wanted to look at, is to understand a little bit more about mental health and mental illness and start to dispel some of those myths we have, because again, we all have mental health. There's a number of things that influence mental health: physical health, family and genetic. So oftentimes mental illness can be genetic. There's also life experiences and things that we come across in our life, social life, culture, environment, that can lead to positive or negative mental health. One of the things that we're really starting to better understand in the field is the neurobiology behind mental health and mental illness. And so what we're starting to understand is that a number of us are actually wired for mental health concerns. And any one of these things can actually, what we would say, is flip on a light switch. So we're starting to think of this wiring and then an actual mental health episode or mental illness is the light switch. And so there could be something in your life that really turns that on. It could be losing someone, it could be losing a job, a friendship, a relationship, and that can actually flip a switch on. The great thing that we're understanding with that, though, is as a light switch goes on, it also goes off. And so it's incredible to think of all of the different ways that if we were to tend to our mental health, we can actually turn that light switch off. And I think that's really important to understand too, is to not feel hopeless or helpless when you're struggling with your mental health. But again, just as that light switch went on, we can actually turn it off as well. Wanted to really talk a little bit about the positive impact of sports. There's a lot of literature that is really mixed on, do athletes struggle with mental health more or less than the general population? The great things is that sport really provides an outlet for stress, for anxiety. There can be an escape from any sort of negative situations or influences. It helps develop resiliency and a growth mindset. A platform for social inclusion. Physical activity, as we know, has a number of benefits on our overall health and wellness. So there are actually a number of what we call protective factors. And I think that's really important to understand, is just being involved in sport, or if you're a coach, being involved in exercise, those are actually incredibly powerful for our mental health. Sport, unfortunately, also has what we call risk factors. And so they can often be high stress and performance environments that will intensify any sort of mental health. A performance can be negatively impacted as our mental health worsens. We could be vulnerable to mental illness, and there are pressures to perform. And that really can lead to overtraining, overworking, overanalyzing, poor motivation. So when you take all of this together, this is why the literature around mental health and sport is so mixed, because we recognize there are a number of what we call protective factors. So a number of incredible things that come with being involved in sport. And then there's a number of things that, again, a person outside of sport, a non-athlete, would not necessarily have to manage. So the risk factors that come along with this. So we're talking about protective factors and risk factors. This is a pretty comprehensive list of what could come up that really could lead to mental health issues. And it's quite a list. And so when you're looking at injury or finances, just the pressure, oftentimes we're away from family and friends. With COVID, we've actually had a number of cancellations or postponement. Some other things that are a risk factor for mental health issues would be gender identity, gender expression, identifying as LGBTQ. And then you're having to end something. So a transition out of something is always really difficult. And so that could also lead to mental health issues. There could also be an underlying mental illness. And so, as I mentioned, a lot of people could be wired for a mental illness or mental health concerns. And there could be things that really will flip that switch on, and you could really be struggling with a mental health concern. So what we wanted to do was really highlight, like, what does this look like? And so while I won't read all of this out, these are early warning signs that have been identified that we want to look at behaviorally, cognitively, emotional, psychologically, or physically. So if you're seeing any of these, sometimes you may think that an athlete is slacking, they may be coming late to practice. One of the pieces of advice we often give is to just simply ask, what's going on? How are you doing? What are things that are going on? One of the things that I'll also say is this is a comprehensive list for, again, a non-athlete. What we also wanted to share is for athletes. And so as coaches, as parents of athletes that are involved in sport, you have a unique opportunity to observe what is out of the ordinary. And so what I'd like to say is that if you have an athlete who is always early or always on time and all of a sudden is maybe even 5 minutes late, ask what's going on. That could actually be an early sign of mental illness or mental health concern. So what I would do is really empower you that if something feels out of the norm, out of the ordinary, ask. I think that's really important. So again, if you have an athlete who's starting to isolate themselves and is usually really social, that's where we really are trying to empower the people that are in athletes' lives or in anyone's life for that matter, to really take some ownership over observing something different, because I think that's when we're able to identify mental illness or a mental health concern. So I wanted to share a little bit about the common mental illnesses. There's a couple of buckets: anxiety disorders, mood disorders, bipolars in there. Some of these have actually been split out. So PTSD, or the trauma and stress related disorders, are different. They used to just be in one bucket. Eating disorders, and then some neurodevelopmental disorders. So if you've ever heard of athletes or young people with ADHD, autism, and then we have those substance related and addictive disorders. So these are the most common with athletes that you may come across. And these are actually really incredibly common. So with the pandemic, we've actually found that around 40% of our young adults are struggling with mental health concerns. It actually doubled to about 78% struggling with mental health. And so that's anywhere from 16 to 25. And so that will definitely look into our youth sport population. It's a little harder to get data on our younger ones, typically because you need parental consent, but it's actually very similar. So our young people are struggling a lot with mental health and mental illness right now, and especially with the pandemic, to know that almost 2/3 of our, or 3/4 of our athletes are struggling with mental health. I think that's important to understand. So I already talked about this a little bit. 1 in 6 is what we're really hypothesizing around 6 to 17-year-olds. And then I think some of the stats that are a little alarming are suicide. And so suicide is the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34. And it's the third leading cause of death for athletes. And so that's really youth athletes up through more of our like semi-professional, professional athletes. When we're understanding death, third leading cause is suicide. There have been some recent studies with the NCAA. So 1/4 of our collegiate athletes will report depression. And then, as I mentioned, 20% of athletes are 20% of adults in general are struggling, 30%, even into 40%. And then if we add in COVID, much worse. So it really is worsening at an alarming rate. Young adult and youth suicidal ideation has been increasing, and suicidal ideation is just even thinking about dying, having the thought that you would be better off dead. That is going up tremendously too. And then we have very specific populations who are also worsening. That is our Black and African American population with what's been going on in our society. So a little bit more on COVID-19. There was a study that was completed in 2022, and it is shown that our college athletes are struggling quite a bit, with 1/3 reporting sleep difficulties, about 1/4 reporting sadness and sense of loss. I think 1 in 12 feeling so depressed that it's difficult to function. So they don't want to get out of bed. They don't even want to pursue their sport. 1 in 12 is actually quite high. Again, I want to highlight that you all are in a unique situation to potentially observe any sort of behavior that feels out of the ordinary. Again, if you have an athlete who's never missed a class and starts missing classes, or fighting with peers or parents, even fighting with a referee. So any behavior that's out of the ordinary, I would really empower you to kind of ask what's going on, because there's a lot of people who are struggling with mental health. One of the other statistics that I think is incredible is around 80% of our student athletes in collegiate settings will go to their coach for information on mental health. So being able to be equipped to say, you know, I may not know what to do, but I'm happy to help. I'm happy to intervene. Just reassure them that you can get help. That's why I'm really drawn to doing a lot of these presentations, is I think the more people that know that mental health is quite common, a mental health concern is quite common, and there are incredible resources. There's a lot of resources. And again, thinking of this light switch that can flip on and off, I feel like is really helpful to just destigmatize and normalize the fact that mental health issues go on. And there's a lot of ways to help them. So hopefully this really will empower those coaches, also parents and referees and anybody at the administrative level, just to know that this is going on and there's a lot we can do about it. All right, so why are these mental health issues and mental illnesses difficult to recognize? You know, the reality is our athletic cultures really celebrate mental toughness. And so I've had the opportunity to be a part of a number of conversations during the Olympics around mental toughness. And the reality is, when I was in the sport, growing up, a lot of times you just, you know, pushed through it and have gone on through an injury, whether that's physical or mental. And I think that that tide is turning a bit, if you will. Mental toughness is being redefined in a way that actually someone who is considered more resilient, and if we're actually looking at someone's performance, pushing through something is not going to equate better results on the field. Oftentimes what it takes is identifying an issue and very directly tailoring a plan to improve. And so whether that's physical or mental, I think we're learning that even tactically on the pitch. If something's wrong, fix it, you know, instead of just pushing through it and ignoring it. So when we're talking about mental toughness, that really is changing, and the literature is actually supporting that pushing through any sort of physical or mental illness is not helpful for performance, and especially sustainable performance. When we're looking at mental health issues and mental illnesses, there's often fears that bringing it up is going to have you looking weak. It could impact the culture of the team. And so I think a lot of those myths need to be dispelled. Because again, when we're starting to better understand the literature, the great thing is we're actually finding that identifying and addressing is going to be our very best option when it comes to anything, particularly around mental health. We know that mental health issues are often underreported, and seeking resources is often uncommon, and that's for fear of stigmatization. So the more we can have conversations that look, a lot of people struggle with mental health, and the reality is there's a lot of resources, let's connect you to one, we'll start to destigmatize. And then this stigma really creates barriers to openly discussing a struggle with mental health. So again, I think the goal is to counteract the stigma through creating positive and inclusive environments where people feel comfortable talking openly. And I know that is a huge goal of US Soccer, and we've crafted that statement pretty specifically. So it's really important to understand who we're talking about. It's one of the philosophies that we've been talking about with US Soccer is seeing a person and not a role. So it's not an athlete, it's not a parent, it's not a coach, it's not a referee or an administrator, but this is a person, and they have a lot that they're bringing to their sport. And so understanding kind of this whole person concept is really important. So mental health issues, mental illness are not exclusive to youth, college, amateur, or even professional athletes. They are happening with our coaches. They're happening with our parents. They really can impact anybody involved in sport at any age, any point in their career, and even outside of sport. So I think one of the statistics to know is the kind of highest group of suicide at this point is 40 to 50-year-old men. And when we're thinking about a lot of our coaches, the reason is they're really usually trying to balance a family, trying to care for a family. They're balancing a lot around careers. And so I think it's really important to understand all of the things that these men are struggling with. One of the reasons that happened as well is that this kind of cohort of men tend to attempt suicide with more lethal means. So that means guns, and just understanding that that usually is fatal. And so this is a population we're really concerned about. And again, I see that you all have the unique opportunity, whether it's a coach who's coaching one of your kids, or you are a coach, an administrator, just to be able to say something's out of the ordinary, something doesn't look right, and do we need to get you some help? Again, the pandemic has been very, very difficult on a lot of people. They've been impacted financially. There's been a lot going on with race in our society as well. So a lot of people are being impacted pretty significantly. And if we're just able to say, look, there's a lot going on right now, I think it's really important to understand that. Some of the other really interesting pieces of data, we often think of eating disorders really impacting our youth. While that is a large cohort of who is struggling with eating disorders, again, it actually tends to be women in their 30s and 40s who are most impacted by eating disorders and body image, bodies changing. And so that is actually rapidly growing as a cohort that is struggling with eating disorders. Across the board, anxiety and depression is really, really high. And then another group that really struggles with mental health and are often not seen are elderly. So anyone over the age of 65, there's often a lot, kind of a sense of loss of identity, loss of purpose. There's a different value with older adults in our population. And so really anybody could be struggling with mental health and mental illness. So just understanding the person and what they bring, and simply being able to understand the fact that, they could be struggling with something. And again, it's something that can be very treated. All right. So one of the things we were hoping was a little bit of interaction. So just if you want to raise your hands in the chat, or just put something in the chat. Have you ever experienced any in your current role or in your daily life supporting someone around their mental health? And if you feel comfortable, feel free to share, write it down, jot it down, just kind of contemplate on that for a moment. I think you can only type, sorry.
I can always, if you want to speak, I can certainly allow you to talk. So feel free if you want to do that. So not a problem. So I think that's Dimitri there. So I can certainly allow you to talk, Dimitri, if you wish to do that. Go ahead, Dimitri.
Yes, good morning to everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Adam knows me. I like to talk a lot. I promise I'll be quick. Yeah, quick. My daughter, the last year, she has taken on too much. She plays soccer with Celtics in Edison Park. She plays tennis at high school. She played JV last year. She's a choralier. She sings. She plays the piano, the guitar. She's a senior at school, and she is slacking at her home duties big time. So it's like I'm trying not to push her too much, but lately she started dropping her Celtic soccer practice. And I hope I'm not wrong, and this is what I want to say, and I want your advice from. I told her that I love that you want to do all those things, but maybe you're taking on too much. Mm-hmm. And as a father and as a soccer player and a coach and everything, she's a better soccer player than she is a tennis player because she just started playing tennis. I hope I didn't say it the wrong way. I'm always very direct and honest. But what can I do? I'm sure you've been in this before. Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Doctor.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's just really understanding the full picture and starting to look at, how do you, in my opinion, sport is incredible for developing these lifelong kind of characteristics, whether that is being disciplined and hardworking. And there's a number of things that really come out of playing sport, and trying to understand what her goals might be. Is it simply maybe tennis is fun and soccer is too much pressure, and understanding the balance of those things. So I actually met with a young athlete not too long ago who was going to, interestingly, tennis lessons 4 and 5 times a week. She was also going to strength and conditioning and some things that were all geared towards tennis. And she's like, I really just want to play volleyball after school with my friends, even if it's just one day. And so understanding the balance of those things to think about, what skills is she wanting to learn? She really just wants to play volleyball to be with her friends. And so we were able to work with her parents around, maybe we drop one part of tennis and being able to, and maybe one day of strength and conditioning or something like that, and being able to better balance. I think a lot of our youth have a lot on their plate. And so being able to have conversations to allow some sort of autonomy with athletes. And again, I think it's astute to be able to say, I think you're doing too much. That's exactly what we're getting at now, is being the concerned parent, guardian, referee, administrator, and to be able to say, look, like, this is my take on it. What do you think? We also have to understand that these are young people and their brains are still developing, their level of development and understanding developing. And so I think there is such a balance, and I think you handled that really well, to just start that conversation and keep going back to the conversation. I know there was periods of time where I even drew back on soccer myself quite a bit. And again, the one thing I will say is, it sounds like she's doing a lot. And I still made it to play in college. I still was able to, really achieve a lot of what I wanted to do with soccer, and was helpful that my parents didn't let me drop something or quit. And we continued to have these ongoing conversations, just where I felt like heard and listened to in a way that was really helpful for my mental health.
May I ask a quick question? Because I know others might want to ask something else. I have 3 issues I need to address with her. Number 1, we paid $1,000 for her to be this fall season with the team, and she's dropping every other practice. Oh, I'm too tired from tennis. One is the money issue. I apologize. I'm going to be very open. I know a lot of people who don't know me listen to this. I have no problem. We're not a rich family. So $1,000 was a lot of money for us to pay for her to be in that club. Number 2, her room is a combat zone. You just can't enter her room because she's dropping all the things. And I said, I don't want you to wash the dishes. I don't want you to help me wash the car. I don't want you to do the lawn. Just take care of your room, number 2. And number 3 is, at which point do you move in and say, listen, her name is Paulina. I think we need to drop something. You need to make a decision, but I'm going to have to be forceful in the sense, it's your decision, but it's my decision ultimately too, because I don't want to have to pay for something that you don't enjoy. She doesn't enjoy doing practice because she's tired. Understandable. Okay, I'm done. Those 3 things. Yeah. When do you move in and just draw the line?
Well, and I think that's what we're understanding with our young people now, is how do you have these collaborative conversations, and then ultimately you're the parent. And so being able to say, it's your decision and mine. One of the best things to say is, this is our decision. Let's come up with something together, and we're going to keep coming back to this. And just having these conversations together, and whether that means sitting down every night after dinner saying, look, okay, this is, again, let's take a look. You were too tired for this and did not do this. And we did not pick up your room, and we did not do this. And just so being able to understand where an athlete's at any given time is incredibly important. And again, for me, I keep thinking, are there other influences of, is she not sleeping well? Is she struggling with COVID, or is she, and those are all just theories, but keep asking, keep the conversation going. And I think that's really our best advice at this point, is being able to be able to have those conversations and have them be very collaborative.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam, for inviting me today. Thank you. Everything is, good advice. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Dimitri. We do
All
have
right.
a couple others, Dr. Bartley. So
Sure.
I think, Ron, are you ready to ask a question or share your story?
I am. Adam, thank you, and good morning. And Dr. Bartley, good morning as well. My name is Ron, and we had a very interesting scenario where we had someone that was, a boy was on the team. He's 17. And all of a sudden his demeanor had changed. He stopped attending training, couldn't figure out what was going on. Did get wind that there were some home issues that appeared starting to occur, and reached out to him and really just point blank asked some questions. Right, started the conversation. It was not easy. It's probably could be a little embarrassing depending on the topics that came up. But at the end of the day, we found out that the gentleman was actually asked to leave his house at 17. He was a junior in high school. He had to start working and finding an apartment for himself at 17, right? Those are major changes and major dynamics in a kid's life, or extreme, I might even say, right? They're not normal challenges that kids at that age would have to experience. So once we had that conversation, we were able to work through and help him find a place to live. Someone was able to take him in, help him out. And he needed a role model and some guidance to help him get back on the right path. He was a good kid. He's a great kid, a good athlete, and he needed that soccer time. He needed to be on that field because that was his outlet every week. And he was having a hard time to figure out how to do that. He's like, I can't pay for soccer and I can't pay for this. And I'm like, we worked internally with some families that were willing to donate some money and paid for his soccer for the season. So then he started showing up again because it was one less stress in his life, right? So I think to your point, asking the question, understanding the problems that they have, starting that dialogue was just key. And I remember seeing him at a practice, and I remember he just gave me a hug out of nowhere for the help. And you don't realize how life-changing it is for him and for you.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that was the perfect example of just simply asking and understanding. There could be, and this is where when we're looking at somebody who is a whole person, and again, I think I wanted to hammer home the fact this could be an athlete, it could be a coach, it could be administrator, it could be a referee that you're yelling at. Trust me, I've yelled at a number of referees in my life. So just thinking about understanding, gosh, what is going on? Like, I'm getting whistled on every play, or they're missing every ball or something, and just being able to ask. And again, maybe you don't do that to the referee after the game, but just understanding that someone is a person that's got a number of factors in their lives that may be influencing their behavior, what's going on. Again, COVID has been particularly hard. And so just understanding those things. I'm so happy for that athlete and all of the steps you made. And I literally cannot think of a better example.
Great. Thanks, Ron. Andreas, do you have a comment or story?
Yes, a story. First of all, a great job. I think this should be, I know mandatory is a strong word, but I think this is important for every coach to be a part of, just like we do with concussions and safety sports and all that stuff. I think it's important. I just wanted to share a personal story. I could share lots, obviously, for those of us that coach for many kids at all levels. I'm going to share one that's exclusive in the college space, because as we know, with COVID and school policies, it becomes very challenging mentally for a lot of the athletes. So I'll share one exclusive for my son, and just some of the things that I've tried to do in hopes to help with some clarity, so to speak, so they don't go down that spiral where they're not good enough, or maybe they should quit, or so my son transferred from one school to another as the potential starting goalkeeper. Unfortunately, when he went from NCAA to NAIA, he was still ineligible for the first two games. and very frustrating, obviously. And then when he was eligible, they went out of the state for a match. He gets an email saying that, he was in contact in school with somebody that was positive, so he has to isolate. And so there's another 2 games that just went by. And so I can notice that you mentioned, Dr. Bartley, the behavior of when you see a certain pattern, you would see him not communicate as much on our family chat group like he normally would. So one of the things that I was big on, because I do study a lot of these podcasts and webinars when it comes to mental health, is always staying engaged. And I've always kind of asked them, hey, how you feeling? And sometimes they won't tell you the truth. But always really focusing on let's not focus on why this is happening, because I'm sure this is not just happening to you. But what could you learn from it? What could you do to move you in the direction of where you still want to go? See, that's something that you can control and something that we can help you with. And so long story short, you started saying that my son's an advocate for mental health right now. He posts a lot of things on an Instagram because he understood that stuff like this is going to happen, and he can either dwell in it and spiral down, or he can focus on the things that he can control and still move him in that direction. And so because I've always was checking in, I guess, so to speak, and being honest, I think that helped tremendously, to the point where now he's an advocate for it and wants to help other athletes just kind of talk through the things that can be controlled. So I just wanted to share that in hopes that maybe helps anybody.
That's amazing. Well, and that's a reason that I've really got involved in pursuing this education and training. Is I had a significant injury after my freshman year, and I actually started to have panic attacks. And so coincidentally, I was a goalkeeper. I had somebody come in cleats up, and I broke my bottom 2 ribs. I punctured a lung, and I had anxiety, and I had never had anxiety before in my life. And everybody just basically said, get back out there. And it was not helpful for anyone to, I didn't know why I was feeling panicky. Like I literally would get to the point where I couldn't breathe. And, they were like, did you develop asthma? Did you everybody went physical. And there was something about getting back out there and feeling like I could get hurt. I actually had 3 surgeries because of this particular injury. And so that was where I wish somebody would have told me, like, you know what, it's okay. And it makes it that there was a question in the chat as well about, social anxiety and like COVID and steps. I think one of the things I wanted to pull out that you said is, what do you think? What would be a good step in this direction? Like, what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? And how do you take these baby steps? And being really collaborative. And like we mentioned with the first scenario too, is like, how do you have these collaborative conversations with people about what their goals are, how to move forward, and just kind of being heard is very, very important. And it's something so small and so important. So thank you for sharing that story. That was incredible.
That's great. I know there was another question in the Q&A. We have too many things to look at, I'm afraid. But Meninda Gill, who's one of our apprentice coach educators as well, works with our ODP program, who's asking about resources in terms of, for each group, maybe players and parents, in terms of different perspectives. Would there be something that you could maybe share?
Yes. And actually, I will go ahead and move us forward, because that's the kind of where we're headed, is what do we do? So we're starting to understand how to be responsible for mental health. We're all responsible for mental health. You're the front line. So you could be that coach, that parent, that peer that recognizes that something is not going well. And we have a number of resources that I'll make sure that I want to get to move forward. So we do like to have this safe sport reminder, because with mental health, a lot of times we try to jump in. And there are some things around safe sports, particularly with communicating one-on-one with a minor. And so athletes may view a coach. As I mentioned, a lot of athletes will go to a coach for help. a referee, a parent, someone that's trustworthy. And that is not an excuse for inappropriate behavior. So obviously a lot of you will probably been exposed to safe sport. And we are really thinking about how do we have the equivalent of safe sport around mental health, just that mental health 101. So we are working on that at the USOPC. Some of the what to do, and I might go through this a little bit more quickly because I had a couple of things to maybe engage with the chat, but we'll go through some of these. For sport culture, this is one of the things you can do is respecting each other, acknowledging that working together collaboratively, as I've mentioned, through challenges, will really create this growth mindset, growth for everyone. And it's often helpful to really focus on what you can change and control. It's really helpful to provide any sort of positive reinforcement. And it's helpful to understand how you can have an environment where somebody could say, I'm not getting this. And that's like, whether it's a drill, whether that's something with mental health, how do you invite athletes or peers or staff, whatever that might be, to say like, I'm not getting this, and be able to work through things. And then leading by example. So that's something that has often been really hard, but to model engagement in self-care can be really, really powerful. Whether, again, that's a coach or a parent saying like, okay, I gotta put my work laptop down at night and go to sleep, or we've got to eat together as a family, or we're going to eat these things and healthy, and model those behaviors and have those very collaborative discussions, but be the role model in those situations. That really creates healthy sport cultures. And then even more specifically with a supportive team environment, how do we reduce isolation, invite athletes to come to us and be really approachable, encouraging athletes to talk to each other. So if you're noticing cliques, change up the drills, change up somebody's friend group, change some things up. And then encouraging players, athletes, anyone you're working with, to talk to family, to talk to friends, to just talk. I think that's really what we're getting at, is to really make sure that athletes, or again, coaches, referees, administrators, have people to talk to and get to know. So I think just having those conversations and knowing that somebody is more than just an athlete and more than their sport is really helpful. And that goes to this piece around balancing sport identity. So we are learning a lot around how to balance a sport identity, because again, athletes are so much more than their sport. A parent is so much more than being a parent. A referee is so much more than being a referee. We have a number of different identities, and I think that's really helpful. One of the things I always like to share too is back in the NFL draft, it would have been, I think, about 3 years ago at this point, everybody who went out in the first round or was selected in the first round played multiple sports in high school. So I think that's been a really incredible kind of picture to understand that we have men that made it to the NFL and played multiple sports, did multiple things up through high school. And so understanding, how do you do things maybe outside of soccer, outside of sport? How do you balance school and all of the things? So I think that's something that we're learning about sporting identity now, is just being able to be a very holistic person. So I will skip through the chat. One of the things we wanted to highlight is, and this is more a little bit of self-reflection, but, you know, a lot of times we think about approaching these differently, you know, and we shouldn't. So are you more or less comfortable? You know, would we assume that the person sprawled out on the field is actually being impacted by the game? Or maybe it is because his parents are getting a divorce. A lot of times we make assumptions, and we just wanted to kind of have this like internal exercise that a lot of times if somebody is struggling, so the young woman curled up by her bed could be thinking about sport and not. And I think somebody that's also just, you know, has his hands in his head on the track, really maybe let down his mom or his dad, or lost a scholarship or something, and or had something to do with sport and something that had nothing to do with sport. So not making assumptions, asking questions, just seeing how somebody is and understanding, is this behavior normal? Probably not. And just going up and asking, what's going on? How are things going? Instead of necessarily assuming, oh, this has to be about a loss or somebody who's struggling hard to get out of bed. it may or may not be their norm, and just understanding what that looks like. So one of the other pieces that we were looking at was kind of this game face versus face for everyday life. And so, you know, all of us are often encouraged and sometimes expected to be completely immersed within the sporting identity, and that leaves very little time for life outside of sport. And again, that's whether you're a parent, a coach, a referee, an administrator, an athlete, but understanding that there is a lot outside of sport. I will say that it's really hard to kind of switch things off. And if you're looking at the different physical performance, mental health, that, you know, sometimes we don't do as good of a job of recovery. So how can we recover with mental health? And like I said, everyone has mental health. But how do you sleep well? How do you eat well? What are the things that you need to be healthy mentally, to be able to do sport and to do what you need to do? So a couple of things that we wanted to also put as resources, everyone, and I think I've really hammered this home, can play a pivotal role in, sorry, keep getting messages, in recognizing. And so again, what I wanted to be clear, you do not have to diagnose or treat. That would be my job. But how can you recognize? And so that's actually what the US Soccer's, like the actual title of their movement around mental health is recognize to recover. And I think that's really important to know, that you do not have to treat or even diagnose. You don't even have to know, oh, this is anxiety. You just have to know something's not right, and they may need to talk to a professional. That's often difficult. Well, it is often difficult for somebody to admit they're struggling. So one of the pieces of advice for me is be patient, keep having those conversations, keep saying I'm here. And as I've mentioned, it's really, really hard to just tough it out. How do we have these conversations? Again, with safe sport, don't speak to a minor alone, one-on-one. If you're concerned, speak to parents, guardians using any of the same techniques, invite them in, just simply ask if they're okay. One of the best ways of trying to understand is just to get their story. So I think that's really important, is just, how are you doing? How's school? Tell me about school. Where are you at school? And so just letting somebody talk and tell their story makes them feel cared about. And I think that's really important. And if you can do that non-judgmentally, sensitive, empathetic, understanding. So some of those traits are going to be really important. And then I would also say giving reassurance, and obviously you have to feel confident in that. But as I've mentioned, turning this light switch on and off is something that we're learning a lot about, and that you can recover from mental health concerns. There's a lot of treatments out there. And then if someone is suicidal, make sure you're getting the appropriate resources, or if you're feeling like it's out of your scope, I think that can be really helpful, just to make sure you're pulling in somebody, whether that's emergency or beyond. So I'll have some of those. So I wanted to make sure I had time to share the resources. So there's a few around the American Psychological Association, American Psychiatric Association, NAMI, so the National Alliance on Mental Illness. These are incredible resources. And I think there's also a lot of very specific resources as well. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline, or Lifeline, you can text. There's also very specific hotlines. So I'm happy to share this presentation so you have all of these, but these are all of the national hotlines for anything specific. The other thing I will share is in 2022, we currently have 911. If you have any sort of mental health emergency, call 911. In 2022, the number 988 will be in effect in every state across the country. And so 988 is actually going to connect you with, instead of police, it will connect you to a licensed mental health provider. And should they need to come out to any sort of situation, they will come with a licensed mental health provider and a police officer. So police officers are getting a lot of training around how to manage mental health, and 988 will go into effect over the course of 2022. So keep an eye and an ear out. I have not heard about Illinois yet, but 988 is going to be the number very soon where you can just call and get all of the resources. They'll make a determination whether they need to come out to a situation if it is related to mental health. And so I think it's important to know that you'll have those resources. And again, these are some of the very specific hotlines. If you're looking for, again, a therapist or a psychiatrist or any of those, these finders are incredible. One of the other plugs I will say is the USOPC is working on a lot as well. And so please feel free to go to our website. We do have a registry of providers who have done safe sport. And so again, I would go to our mental health courses soon. So US Soccer, just a kind of a final plug, we're continuing to pursue. I've really worked with them pretty closely around providing resources, education, support to the soccer community to help the game grow for this safe and healthy environment for everyone. So again, that's athletes, coaches, parents, referees, administrators. So the call to action really would be, how can you make mental health a part of the conversation, regardless of your role? How do you identify and support individuals who are dealing with mental health? And just thinking for yourself, what would be your strategy? How do you ask those questions? And then we have the resources for the Recognize to Recover. As it was mentioned, there will be more coaching education opportunities around mental health. Some of the things we've thought about would be more specifics on suicide, specifically anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and really breaking things down for those who are interested to learn a little bit more about any of those mental health conditions, to be able to learn. So this is our group that we've been working with US Soccer. So just wanted to give them a bit of a shout out as we put these presentations together, reiterate this website, and then be able to just leave a couple of minutes for questions. So I hope I didn't go through that too quickly, but wanted to make sure it's how do I get to those resources? What do I do? There are a lot of resources available. So yeah, hope that was helpful.
That was fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. I know that certainly if anybody has any quick questions, to kind of keep it under the hour, but I have actually one quick one, Dr. Bartley, is in terms of coaches and their own self-care, would there be any couple of quick best practices? We've got a few directors of coaches that are on the call. How can they identify things that can maybe help themselves as well as help the coaches that work for them?
I think it's the same conversations with athletes. Have support people, have people you're talking to, have people who may recognize if you're out of sorts, out of the ordinary, having that support system for coaches, for directors as well, is to just, who do you rely on? Who do you talk to? I think that's just as important. And again, knowing that the value of being a good role model is huge. And so being able to do that, making sure you're getting enough sleep, nutrition, exercise, all of those things, being able to manage your stress. One of the things specifically that I like to do is, when you're not in a stressful situation, identify what I would call a toolbox that will address stress. And so whether that's like, I know one of my things is getting a pedicure, one of my things is going for a run, one of my things is just looking at pictures of my kids. And so I have about 10 things, and a little bit of the science is usually when we're getting stressed, what's happening in the brain is the neurons are firing very, very quickly. Oftentimes we're, even depending on how stressed we are, going into fight or flight mode. And that means the oxygen is not going to the brain. So basically we don't think as clearly. That's why it's really hard to make big decisions if you're feeling stressed. So I always have, I know what my toolbox is, and I know that, whether it's taking a few deep breaths, going for a walk, any of those things. Do that and think about that when you're in a good spot. So that's my best advice, even specifically, is know what those things are long before you ever get stressed and need to utilize them.
That's great. Thank you. There was one last question here from Andreas. Do you work with players, parents, one-on-one as far as therapy?
So we currently have a team of 5 at the USOPC, and our scope is the Team USA. So we work with national team athletes and coaches, and the registry that we provided on the Team USA website, it's actually teamusa.org. I should put it on the slide now. /mental health registry. We have hundreds of providers who work one-on-one with athletes, with coaches in your local communities. So interestingly, our licenses are bound by state. And so I can only work within Colorado. I have a few other state licenses from, I was at Ohio State and North Carolina previous to this. So, but we're happy to help y'all find resources. And there's also a general, it's mental health at USOPC.org. If I said that too quick, we can make sure y'all get it, but mental health at USOPC.org. We are happy to find you all resources in your local communities.
That's great. And I think what I'm going to do, and I'll just check with Alexa, I'll make sure I have the right survey. I'm going to put that into the chat as well. Hopefully I can do that. So then everybody has that. Let me just double check. I believe that's it. Hopefully, does that look correct, Alexa?
Yes, that's it. Thank you, Adam.
Oh, not a problem. So certainly want to thank Dr. Bartley, Alexa, and everybody who contributed today. We really appreciate your time and information. I think it's definitely going to be something that they can always go back on in terms of looking back. So any final thoughts?
I just wanted to say thank y'all for having me. It's always good to talk to the soccer community, and we've got a ton of resources that we're really excited about. If y'all don't know, the USOPC is funded on donations, and we've gotten some incredible donations after the games. So we're really going to start ramping up mental health education. We're happy to be back and present on any topics. So thank y'all for your time.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Dr. Bartley. And thank you to all of the coaches here at Illinois Youth Soccer. So we welcome any feedback, any more questions. So we'd love to hear from you. And thanks so much for your time today. And thank you to Mary Jane as well for all of the logistics with this.
I'll leave it to you, Mary Jane, to anything, Mary Jane? Not a problem. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. We appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing